بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. All praise and thanks belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon His servant and final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As to what follows, this morning's lecture bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, I thought of what to present for you in this hour or so, and I know that we have to dedicate some time for questions and answers. We'll do that inshallah ta'ala after the lecture, but for now we are focused on our lesson. I thought what would be something appropriate, something that each and every single one of us experiences on a day-to-day basis. And what I came up with was to share with you a prophetic supplication, a dua that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught us, that is a remedy and it is a treatment for distress, for worry, for calamities, and for anxiety. And this hadith, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, at the end of it, I will mention it to you, at the end of this hadith, when the Sahaba were listening attentively as he mentioned and narrated these prophetic words, they said to him at the end, Ya Rasulullah, ala nata'allamuha. They said to him, Ya Rasulullah, should we learn these words? Should we learn them or not? So then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, Bala, ينبغي لمن سمعهن أن يتعلمهن. He said to them, yes, indeed, certainly, no doubt about it. Anyone who hears them. So that's the first thing. Anyone who hears them. You need to hear the words and listen to the words of this hadith, of this dua. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, anyone who hears them, then he must learn them. And learning them doesn't only mean to memorize this dua. Learning, it means to memorize and to understand, most importantly, that which you have memorized, and then to implement what is in them of words. Whoever does so, then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam grants or guarantees this person a certain matter. And what is this matter? Let's look at the hadith from the very beginning and see what the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said. This is the hadith of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, in which he said that the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, ما أصاب أحدا قط هم ولا حزن. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, anyone who is afflicted by ham and huzn. Al-ham is worry. And worry is related to the future. A person is always worried about what is ahead of him. You're not worried of the past and what you had done in the past. The worry is always ascribed to the future. So the word alham in the Arabic language refers to worry and anxiety and matters that are concerning to you related in the future. Such as, and people are different when it comes to their worries and concerns. People are worried about their future test with a doctor and what kind of diagnosis or what kind of result that they will receive. People are worried about their financial state in the future. People are worried about their family in the future and their children and who they marry and where they study and what school they go to and so on. People are different when it comes to their worries and concerns. So when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, if a person, whether male or female, was to be struck by an intense calamity, a worry of some sort, wala huzn, and if he was struck by a calamity that is known as huzn. Well, huzn is sadness and grief. And that is related to matters of the past. A person, when he is sad and he is grieving, he is sad and he grieves matters of the past, not the future, because the future hasn't happened yet. So there's nothing to be sad about. But the sadness is related to matters of the past, such as a person lost a loved one of his, a parent of his, a child of his, went through a divorce in the past, his child was misguided, and that was many years ago and it happened in the past. There was a friendship and a relationship that he had with someone in the past and it broke off, for example. All of these bring worry, it brings sadness and grief upon a person when he sits down and he begins to reflect over these past events. And so our life is full of ham and huzn. If you're not worried about something in the future, you're sad about something that happened in the past. And of course, for the believer, one of the greatest grief or one of the greatest, saddest moments he should have in his life are the sins that he had committed in the past and the lost opportunity that he had lost in the past in where he could have enhanced his relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. He's sad and he grieves about these matters. And this would be the greatest regret of a person on the Day of Judgment. The greatest regret on the Day of Judgment would be the opportunities that a person had to repent from his sins, to grow in his relationship with Allah, to conduct voluntary deeds, and he never done them. That would be a regret for him. And this is why al-ulama rahimahumullah considered the highest form of tawbah, the highest form of repentance is to repent from voluntary deeds that you could have done but you decided not to do out of whatever situation a person had. And imagine a person standing not only asking Allah to forgive him from sins that he had done, but he asks Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive him because he was able to fast on Monday and he didn't, or he was able to pray Salat al-Sunnah the before and after the prayers and he didn't, or he was able to read Quran on this specific time and specific day and he could have made this a habit and a routine in his life but he didn't. So this, if a believer is close to Allah Azza wa Jal, this brings huzn to his heart. It brings sadness and grief that he lost a moment of closeness to Allah Azza wa Jal. So whatever this case may be, whatever this difficulty may be, whatever this anxiety may be and concern, and whatever this grief may be, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, if a person was to be afflicted by these matters, and then he said, Allahumma inni abduka wa ibnu abdika wa ibnu amatik, nasiyati biyadik, ماض في حكمك عدل في قضاؤك أسألك بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أو أنزلته في كتابك أو علمته أحدا من خلقك أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك أن تجعل القرآن ربيع قلبي ونور صدري وجلاء حزني وذهاب غمي. These are the words. I'll explain them to you. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam promised, anyone who said these words, when he experiences in his heart a moment of sadness or fear or anxiety or stress, the prophetic promise is, إِلَّا أَذْهَبَ اللَّهُ هَمَّهُ وَحُزْنَهُ. Allah Azza wa Jal would abolish and He will wipe out and He will remove his concern and his anxiety and his sadness and his grief. Allah Azza wa Jal would remove the pain of that from his life. The worry and the concern may still be there, but the pain for that concern and that worry and that sadness would be removed. وَأَبْدَلَهُ مَكَانَهُ فَرَحًا. And not only that, that's good enough. Imagine the pain of all these worries you had went away and they were sorted. That's good enough. Yet the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam adds to this another gift, another grand gift. He says, وَأَبْدَلَهُ مَكَانَهُ فَرَحًا. And He would replace this sadness and this worry and this stress. He would replace it with complete happiness and pleasure and excitement and joy. So a person has gone from completely one state of despair and loss to a totally new state and a different state of happiness and excitement. And then this is when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum said, Ya Rasulullah, do we have to learn this hadith? Do we have to learn this supplication? He said, yes indeed, anyone who hears their words, like you have just heard the words of this hadith, he said, of course, whoever hears them should learn it. And I said to you, not only memorize it, but learn its meaning. So what I wanted to touch upon is some of the meanings embedded with this hadith and the effect of this hadith in removing sadness and depression and worry. How does this hadith actually do that? Is it the words of the hadith or the teachings of the hadith? And how do we see the effect of this hadith in our life and the effect of this dua in our life? My sisters in Islam, if you were to take a deep look at this prophetic dua, you will find that it is made up of 4 parts. It is made up of 4 parts. And each part is important for you to have a good grasp of, to understand really well, and to implement in your life. And each and every single one of these parts contributes towards bringing this happiness and excitement and peace and joy in a person, in a believer's life. Let's look at the first part. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said at the beginning, Allahumma inni abduk wabnu abdik wabnu amatik. That's the first part. Here he said, Allahumma, my Lord, I am your slave. Inni abduk, I am your slave. Wabnu abdik, and I am the son of your slave. Meaning my father was your slave and I'm his son. Wabnu amatik, and I am also the son of your female slave, because my mother is a slave to you as well. So the first part of this dua is known as implementing at-tawheed. These are words in which a person is acknowledging and declaring his oneness to Allah Azza wa Jal. You are saying that, oh Allah, I am your slave. My father is your slave. My mother is your slave. My father all the way up to Adam alayhi salam, they are all slaves of yours. And my mother all the way up to Hawa alayhi salam are all slaves of yours. I'm a slave. My entire generation is a slave too. I've never tasted freedom in my life. I've only known slavery to you. And I am the most humbled of creation before you. I am in full submission and obedience to you. Inni abduka abnu abdik. I am a slave of yours in all cases. Whether I'm young, whether I'm old. Whether I am dead or alive, I am still a slave of yours. When I'm obeying you, I'm your slave. And if I happen to disobey you, I am still your slave. I acknowledge this matter. When I'm in good health, I'm your slave. And I'm in really weak health, I am also your slave. I'm all yours. Both myself and my parents and my wealth and everything that belongs to me, we are all slaves of yours. This is the very beginning of this dua. And so when a believer gets his mind around the idea of at-tawheed, oneness to Allah Azza wa Jal, slavery before Allah, then the effect of this is that it calms the disturbed heart. It settles the disturbed heart. When a person is bothered with a worry or a moment of grief or anxiety or sadness, depression, and he busies his heart with remembering his purpose in life, and that is, he is a slave of Allah, and he continues to repeat these words and acknowledge this truth, and immerses his heart with this reality, slowly and slowly whatever concerns him becomes to, or it begins to subside. And if you were to notice the many prophetic supplications concerning grief and sadness and worry, you will find that the majority, if not all the dua that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught us that are a solution to a person during a time of calamity, you will find that the majority of the prophetic ahadith and dua contain the words La ilaha illallah in them. If you took the hadith of Asma bint Umays, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says to her, the words of the one who is in distress is Allah, Allah, Rabbi la ushriku bihi shay'a. See that? Allah, Allah, Rabbi. There is tawheed in this, an acknowledgement that you're a slave of Allah and you worship Allah Azza wa Jal. In another hadith, a dua, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, the words of the one who is experiencing a calamity and distress is to say, La ilaha illallah al-azim al-halim. La ilaha illallah Rabbul Arsh al-Azim. La ilaha illallah Rabbul Samawati wal-Ardi wa Rabbul Arsh al-Kareem. You notice, there's a lot of La ilaha illallah in it. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says that the dua of the distressed and the one experiencing a calamity is the dua of the Noon alayhi salam, Yunus alayhi salam, when he was in the belly of the whale and he said, La ilaha illa ant, subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Once again, he repeated the word La ilaha illallah. So the idea when you say this dua here, and you say Allahumma inni abduka wa ibnu abdika wa ibnu amatik, you need to realize and understand that this is the exact purpose for why you are created. To be that slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, that humbled slave of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so, al-ulama rahimahumullah, they say that the heart of the human being, it was created to fulfill this worship and slavery to Allah. It was created to fulfill slavery to Allah and nothing else. So the more you occupy yourself for what the heart was created, the more you find peace and tranquility in your life, because you are doing that which the heart was created for. And when you occupy and you busy your heart with other than what it was created for, it begins to become disturbed. And that's when it becomes unsettled. And that's when a person begins to put the majority of his focus on his calamity, on his sadness, on his worry, on his concerns, on his anxiety, on his stress, and so on. Even this is the effect. The heart was created for La ilaha illallah. When you use the heart for that which it was created for, and you make that the greatest matter in your life, there's no more room for other things that are concerning you and bothering you. So they may be still there, they may still be there, but they're behind the curtain. They are not your greatest worry. And this is how the pain of these calamities are removed from a person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. It is only by the remembrance of Allah. And the greatest word to remember Allah is La ilaha illallah. It is with the remembrance of Allah. It is through La ilaha illallah in which the hearts find their tranquility and their peace. تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, as Allah Azza wa Jal said. So that's the first part. Allahumma inni abduk, wabnu abdik, wabnu amatik. And this is very important for a person to focus upon and ponder over. And of course, in today's day and age, there are many things that distract us from our purpose in life. And this is why a person needs to spend a lot of his time and a lot of effort perfecting and completing this tawheed in his heart. The greater the acknowledgement of Allah Azza wa Jal in your life, the less and less worries and pains you have in your life. And a person needs to, as we said, daily effort. And he needs to strive to perfect and complete at-tawheed in his heart. And when you say, Allahumma inni abduka, you're not only saying that I'm a slave of yours and I acknowledge la ilaha illallah, but abd is a person who implements Allah's law. And he implements Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command in his life. This is what abd is. You know, the word al-abd, ubudiyah, worship, it comes from a word that means flatness. Yani they would say, الطريق طريق معبد. If you wanted to describe a flat road or a flat surface, then you say طريق معبد. A road that is flat and smooth to walk over. A road that is humble, right? Because something that is flat and smooth and you can walk over it, it's a humbled road. It's طريق معبد. So the idea is that the human being, without the worship of Allah, is arrogant. The human being, the further he steps away from the reality of him being a slave of Allah, he becomes arrogant. And this is a reality. The further away you are from the worship of Allah, the closer you are to arrogance. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He said, إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا إِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. Whenever the disbelievers were told, say La ilaha illallah, acknowledge this reality that you are a slave of Allah, Allah Azza wa Jal, He did not say they would turn away. They turned away in disbelief. They rejected the word. Allah said they became arrogant. Meaning their turning away and rejection of this word is arrogance. Anyone who leaves out any teaching of Islam, that is because of arrogance. And so the worship humbles a person. You see, when a person is far away from worship, he is arrogant. He is ungrateful to Allah Azza wa Jal. He is rough and he is rigid. And the worship, as I said to you, al-ibadah means something flat and smooth and humbled. The worship softens a person. It humbles him. It makes him smooth and flat so that he doesn't have this arrogance in his heart. And this worship, when a person commits to it, after having said La ilaha illallah and perfected and strived to perfect this tawheed in his heart, that is how relief comes to his heart. And that's how the heart becomes settled from all these calamities and concerns that he has in his life. Even that is the first principle that we find in this hadith and this dua. When you say Allahumma inni abduka wa abnu abdika wa abnu amatik, you're supposed to immediately understand that it is your tawheed, your acknowledgement of La ilaha illallah, and your worship that is going to settle that heart and wipe away the pain. So we find out that these are not just words that you say on your tongue and then your life has no connection to them. These are words that you're going to say and then you're going to act by these words. Even if a person was to fall into disobedience or sin, you still need to acknowledge that at that very moment you are still a slave of Allah Azza wa Jal. Nothing has changed. Sometimes the shaitan, he comes and he disturbs the person to make him think that if you are to disobey Allah, you are not a slave of His. You have removed yourself from the slavery of Allah, might as well continue down that path. And that's how a person loses his relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. Yani imagine if you were to, let's say you had clean clothes and you walked outside with clean clothes and some mud came onto your clothes. What are you going to do? You'll just get more mud and just paste it all on top of your clothes? You won't do that. Rather, you will quickly go and find somewhere to go and wash it. And that's the situation of the believer. Every time he falls into a sin and he blackens his heart with something of the wrong that he did, not might as well just blacken the whole thing and keep going down that path. A person needs to quickly look into the situation of his heart, seek forgiveness of Allah Azza wa Jal, and bring it back crystal clean and white as it should be in preparation to meet Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's the idea of the first part. Allahumma inni abduk, wabnu abdik, wabnu amatik. Then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam teaches us in this hadith, in this prophetic dua, and this is the next part. ناصيتي بيدك ماض في حكمك عدل في قضاؤك. That's the second part. ناصيتي بيدك, my Lord, my forelock is in your hand. And nasiyah is the front part of the head of the person. You're saying nasiyati, my Lord, my forelock is in your hand. Meaning, you have complete control over me. You do as you wish and as you decree upon me. If you decide that I live, I live. If you decree that I die, I die. ماض في حكمك. We're saying, ناصيتي بيدك. You have complete control. If you decree that I'm rich, I'm rich. If you decree that I'm among those impoverished, then that's my case. I'm in a state of poverty. If you decree health upon me, then that's in your control. And if you decree sickness for me, that's in your control. ناصيتي بيدك. My forelock is in your hand. عدل ماض في حكمك. ماض في حكمك. Your decision over me has passed. And I acknowledge this matter. عدل في قضاؤك. And your decree upon me is completely just. And that's the second part. ناصيتي بيدك ماض في حكمك عدل في قضاؤك. My forelock is in your hand. Your decision over me has already passed. And it is. Whatever you have decreed is going to be a reality and it will happen. And your decree upon me is the most just. This is the second part. And this second part is known as al-iman bil-qada'i wal-qadar. Belief in the divine decree. And that's the second matter that will bring peace and tranquility to a person's heart in a moment of distress and calamity and anxiety. That you believe and you accept wholeheartedly what Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed for you. And these three statements fortify this matter. وَالْإِيمَانِ بِالْقَضَاءِ وَالْقَدَرِ, believing in the divine decree, is one of the 6 tenets of faith that a person must embrace and believe in order for him to be recognized as a mu'min, as a believer in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he answered Jibreel concerning what Iman is, he said to him, Iman is to believe in Allah, His books, His messengers, the last day, the angels. And then he said, وَتُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. And you also have to believe, and you must believe in the divine decree, the good and the bad of it. The quicker a person accepts the divine decree of Allah Azza wa Jal in his heart, the easier and the quicker relief and happiness, enjoyment would settle in this person's heart. Whenever a calamity happens, if you reject it by questioning it, not being pleased, by speaking words that displease Allah Azza wa Jal, such as, why me? Why did it happen like this? I've done everything that's right. How can Allah Azza wa Jal do this to me? I think Allah Azza wa Jal hates me because of such and such calamity. All these are words displeasing to Allah, and all these words and this attitude of yours in a time of calamity is weakening your faith in the divine decree. It weakens it. And as a result, a person will remain disturbed. The concerns and the worries and the grief and the sadness will stay upon his heart. They will not go anywhere. And in fact, you have added calamity upon yourself. Because you're going through the calamity anyway, so there's immense pain in that. And in addition, you have displeased Allah with that which you've said. That's another calamity added onto your calamity. You're not making the situation easier. And you're going through it. It's not like the calamity is going to be removed. You're going through it anyway. No one can remove it and no one can abolish it from you other than Allah Azza wa Jal. So the idea is, might as well submit to the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. You might as well do that wholeheartedly. And you do that by reflecting over these words in this dua. Nawsiyati biyadik. My Lord, my forelock is in your hand. Wallahi, these few words eases for a person to accept a calamity in his life. When you're saying that your forelock is in his hand, so that means he can do what he wants. And then at the same time you're saying, Adlun fiya qada'uk. Anything you've decreed upon me is just. Meaning even though you're going through what you're going, at the same time you're acknowledging that Allah is just for what He has done and decreed for you. This is not Allah's injustice over you. This is not Allah Azza wa Jal being unjust. Allah Azza wa Jal is not described as being unjust. وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. Your Lord doesn't oppress anyone. Even the disbeliever that ends up in the hellfire on the day of judgment, Allah Azza wa Jal never wronged him. وَمَا ظَلَمْنَاهُمْ وَلَكِنْ كَانُوا هُمُ الظَّالِمِينَ. And this is why the disbeliever in the hellfire would acknowledge, فَاعْتَرَفُوا بِذَنْبِهِمْ. They acknowledge that this is the only place that befits us now, and we've brought ourselves here by our own actions. So the idea is, when you embrace these words of the prophetic supplication, during a moment of calamity, it helps ease the pain and the suffering that you are experiencing. Because you know that your situation is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in no one else's hand. And if you were to accept these words and accept this qadr of Allah and this decree that He has decreed for you, if you do that, at that very moment, your iman is increasing because you have accepted a decree from the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. The iman rises, the iman increases. It's not the calamity itself that increases your iman, but it's your acceptance of this calamity that increases your iman. It's the acceptance of it. And this is why Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran, He said about Al-Ahzab, He said, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ قالوا هذا ما وعدنا الله ورسوله وصدق الله ورسوله وما زادهم إلا إيمانا وتسليما. Allah Azza wa Jal, He speaks about the believers in Al-Madinah. When they were faced by the disbelievers, the army that had come from Mecca, 10,000 of them. Imagine that. What kind of calamity is that? That's bigger than any calamity you're facing at the moment, because this is a matter of life and death. 10,000 disbelievers are coming towards the Muslims. And they are small in number. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described the believers and the great stress and calamity they went through. He said, وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرِ, that their hearts had reached their throat. Meaning they were shivering and shaking and they were almost about to die from what they had seen in front of them. That's the great calamity and stress they went in. Allah Azza wa Jal, what did He say? He said, when the believers saw this, and they were terrified, they said to one another, هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. They said to each other, see this? This is exactly what Allah and His Messenger promised us. Because this is what Allah promised in the Quran. أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا. Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, did you people assume you'll enter the paradise and you will not be afflicted by that which afflicted those before you, of poverty and war and so on? So they said to each other, this is Allah's promise. This calamity that's come to us now, of 10,000 disbelievers ready to take our souls and kill us, this is what Allah promised. Then they said to one another, وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. And Allah and His Messenger have absolutely spoken the truth. What was the result? Allah said, وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا. And these words they spoke, even though they were terrified, only increased them in iman and in submission to Allah Azza wa Jal. They didn't lose their submission to Allah. because of their calamity. In fact, their submission and worship of Allah and their iman in Allah increased. How is that? What increased it? Was it the calamity in front of them? No. It was the fact that they had seen with their own eyes Allah's promise come to life. And so, when you're stressed by a matter or a calamity afflicts you, and you remember, this is Allah's promise. Allah said, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. Allah said, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, we will surely, most definitely, certainly test you with something of fear, anxiety, and hunger as well, poverty, loss of business, loss of wealth, loss of lives, and so on. Allah promised this, He already promised it. So when it comes in your life, when you remember that moment of sadness and grief, when a calamity strikes, when it's a great concern that you have, this is what Allah promised. What are you surprised about? Why is a person losing his deen at that moment? What has happened to you new now that has shocked you? To leave your relationship with Allah and your submission to Allah. What has happened? Isn't this what Allah had said 1,400 years ago? Seems to be that you weren't reading the Quran. You're not reading Allah's promises. Maybe that's why you're shocked. But the one who's aware of this matter, and he says it through these words, ناصيتي بيدك, my forelock is in your hand. You do what you want. ماضٍ في حكمك, whatever you have decreed will happen. It will happen. There's no change for it. عدل في قضاؤك, and then you acknowledge, my Lord, anything you have decreed for me is perfect wisdom and justice. That is what begins to settle the heart of the believer. And I give you an example. If you were students at a school and I walked in at the end of the term and I handed out exam papers and I said, your exam is now, the student will be shocked. What do you mean? You never told us that we have an exam. We're not prepared for it. And rightfully so, they're in great shock. But if I was, as a teacher, was to say to you, a month before, I said, students, get ready. In a month, there is going to be an exam. I'm going to examine you on all these chapters. By the time that 1 month comes, no one is shocked. Everyone is sitting there, ready to take on the paper, and they're prepared. No one's got their books with them, their pen is there, and they've memorized what they have to memorize for the exam, and they will write. What's the difference between the two situations? The first one, where the students were shocked, they were not informed. And the other scenario, in where they were not shocked, they were informed that the exam will be coming. And similarly, of course, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, Allah Azza wa Jalla has already told us of calamities that are going to come. And He took an oath and He promised, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ. So the idea is, the believer has to be prepared. He has to be prepared, so that when the test comes, he's not shocked. Allah already told you. So this is the second part of this prophetic supplication, and how it brings immense peace and tranquility upon the heart. Just like those students that were prepared for the exam, they weren't all shocked and their heart was beating fast. They weren't, because they were prepared. And so the believer who acknowledges this reality, that the calamities of Allah Azza wa Jal and what He has decreed for a person will happen in the manner Allah Azza wa Jal wants them to be, then his heart will be settled and it will not be disturbed. And that's the effect of this second part in bringing happiness and joy and excitement upon this believer. And then at this very moment, when the calamity comes, of course a person would know that the worst thing, the absolute worst thing you could ever do in a moment of calamity is leave the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal and abandon it. Under the excuse that I'm waiting for things to get better, and once my heart is ready emotionally, I will then once again embrace Allah Azza wa Jal's command. And that is the absolute worst thing you could ever do in a time of calamity. And I tell you something, when people lose their deen, when people lose their steadfastness upon Islam, the majority lose it in a moment of calamity. No one loses their deen when things are going good and health is well. Alhamdulillah, money is there, children are all good, family is all together. No one loses his deen at that time. It's very easy to implement Allah's law at that time. Where is the greater test? When the calamity strikes. And these are moments, if you read the message correctly, if you read Allah's message correctly, you would understand that that calamity only came to test your submission. It only came to test your submission to Allah's command. Are you a proper slave of Allah? Wallah, you're just that slave that worships in times of ease and in times of difficulty. I have no clue who Allah Azza wa Jal is. You fail in the first part of this supplication that we spoke about, being a true slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the idea. Wallah Azza wa Jal, He said in Surah Al-Taghabun, ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله. Any calamity that strikes, it only happened by Allah's permission. وَمَنْ يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهِ. And anyone who believes in Allah, As-Salaf rahimahumullah, they said, anyone who believes in Allah, meaning anyone who embraces this calamity and believes that it only came from Allah, and believes that Allah is the all-knowledgeable and wise, and He doesn't oppress concerning this calamity, he believes these realities and these matters, the gift is يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. Allah would guide his heart. In the very next ayah, Allah said, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولِ. Obey Allah and obey His Messenger. There was a commandment of obeying Allah and His Messenger immediately after Allah Azza wa Jal said or spoke about the calamities that affect a person. That's like a reminder from Allah that do not forget the submission to Allah immediately after a calamity. Because this is where you're going to find the peace and the tranquility and the joy that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam promised. Then the third part of this dua, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, أسألك بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أو أنزلته في كتابك أو علمته أحدا من خلقك أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, now he says, I ask you, O Allah, by every name with which you have named yourself, and I ask you through every name that you have revealed in your book, and every name that you have taught one of your creation, because there are names of Allah that up until this day we don't know about. There are names of Allah that will be taught to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam on the day of judgment. Even he sallallahu alayhi wasallam never knew about them. And he will know them on that day, and he will use them and say them to praise Allah Azza wa Jal. And I ask you, O Allah, through every name that you have kept hidden in the unseen with you. Therefore, the third matter in this hadith that brings tranquility and peace upon the heart, when a person is experiencing distress and sadness and anxiety, is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names, is to develop and build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. Every single name of Allah brings you closer to Allah Azza wa Jal and eases the pain of suffering and calamity in your heart. And this is why Allah Azza wa Jal, He commanded, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. To Allah Azza wa Jal belongs the best of names, so call unto Him through His names. والعلماء رحمهم الله, they say, مَنْ كَانَ بِاللَّهِ أَعْرَفْ كَانَ لَهُ أَخْوَفْ. The more a person knows Allah Azza wa Jal, and you can only know Allah through His names and attributes, nothing else. The more a person knows Allah, the more he becomes conscious and aware of Allah, the more he fears Allah Azza wa Jal. So that is the first part. That's the third part. To know Allah Azza wa Jal's names, to research Allah's names, to discover them, to study them and to implement them in your life. The names of Allah are to be implemented in our life. How do you implement a name of Allah in your life? For example, when you know Allah Azza wa Jal is Al-Halim, the patient, And then you practice patience in your life. You are applying Allah's name in your life. When you know that Allah Azza wa Jal is Al-Alim, the all-knowing. He's the all-knowing. And then you commit to learning and seeking knowledge and learning the Quran and learning Sunnah al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then you are implementing Allah's name Al-Alim. And so learning the names of Allah is not a weekend course. It's not a Saturday and Sunday where you gather and you learn the 99 names of Allah. Learning the 99 names of Allah is a lifelong project. Every single day you are supposed to learn from the names of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the more, as we said, you know about Allah, the more peace and tranquility descends upon the heart. And as a result, this is how the worry and that stress and the pains of these matters begin to subside. Because you filled your heart with the names of Allah. There's no more room for anything else. If you've made that the greatest concern, the names of Allah and how to come closer to Allah through His names, and you filled and occupied your heart with this matter, there's no more room. What is there room? For what kind of sadness is there room? For what kind of anxiety and fear and worry and concern is there in the heart? May people's list of concerns and worries only grows because their heart is emptied from Allah Azza wa Jal and emptied from the names of Allah. So they have all time in life to sit down and think about problems and calamities and worries and discuss them and think if this happens and if that happened or if this happened. And a person loses in that case. And he brought harm and brought pain upon himself. Meanwhile, if he was to focus on the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, that would have brought tremendous relief upon himself. You know, as we were discussing in yesterday's lecture about the name of Allah Azza wa Jal, Al-Hayy, the all-living. And we said that the people of Al-Madinah, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had died, everyone was in complete chaos and panic. This is an event even worse than if your own parents and your own children were to die. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had died. Umar radiallahu anhu was prepared to kill anyone who says this. Uthman would fall onto the ground. Ali couldn't even speak a word. This was the case of Al-Madinah until Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu ascended the mimbar. And he said to the people, "O people, anyone who used to worship Muhammad, then Muhammad had died sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And anyone who worships Allah, then Allah is the all-living that doesn't die." And just that name of Allah, the all-living, it brought immense comfort to the believers that had just been worried and stressed out about the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They underwent the greatest calamity in life. That is the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And their disturbed, unsettled heart settled the very moment they heard the name of Allah, Al-Hayy, the all-living. And this is why even the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would say, anyone who was afflicted with a calamity, فَلْيَذْكُرْ مُصَابَهُ بِي, then immediately rush to think about the calamity that struck you when the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam died. And that should soften the calamity of a person. No matter what you're going through, it's not greater than the fact that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam died. That's the disconnection of al-wahy from the sky to the earth. A lot of calamity happened after this. But the idea is to reflect over the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, and each and every single name of Allah has a unique effect on the heart and bringing peace and tranquility and excitement and joy to the heart. And then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, and this is the final matter, of this prophetic supplication. He said, أسألك, he said, أن تجعل القرآن ربيع قلبي ونور صدري وجلاء حزني وذهاب همي. He said, my Lord, I implore you, I beg you, and I ask you that you make the Quran the spring and the delight and the joy and the comfort of my heart, and the light of my chest, and the remover of my grief, and the abolisher of my worries. And therefore, The fourth thing is the Quran in a believer's life. The Quran in the believer's life. You notice that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam here, he said, my Lord, make the Quran Rabi'a qalbi. What is Rabi'a qalbi? So many, when they translated the spring of my heart. You see, Rabi' is two things. Number one, Rabi', it refers to the channels of water that come from the ocean, and as a result they begin to irrigate the land. So there's an ocean and there's an opening like a lake that streams. That lake, that channel of water is called in Arabic Ar-Rabi'. And the purpose of this Rabi' is to irrigate and give life to the land that's left and right of it. When you say, my Lord, make the Quran the Rabi' of my heart, meaning give me life in the heart with this Quran. Then the Quran is like water that is sprayed on a dead land. Give life to my heart. The other meaning of a Rabi', when a person is sitting and he has folded his legs, that sitting is referred to as tarabba'a. Tarabba'a al-rajul, they say. If a person sat, folded his leg, then that sitting is called al-Rabi', al-tarabbu'. And you know, when someone sits and his leg is folded, meaning he's sitting there for a long time. He's going to be there for a while. He doesn't intend to move anytime soon. Unlike if a person was to sit on his knee, for example, he was kneeling, then that looks like a very temporary sitting in where he's ready to get up and move. So it's like 1 or 2 minutes and he's going to get up. But and that's why in our sujood, in the sitting between the sujood, it's on our knees, because it's not intended for a long time. And then we go into sujood and so on. But the sitting of crossing the leg, that implies this person is ready to sit hours. So make the Quran Rabi'a qalbi, meaning make the Quran permanent and settled in my heart. Not a matter of Allah, just when Ramadan comes, it just crosses the heart and goes away. Or the Quran is the fact that when I read 2 or 3 ayat, then that's it, moving on. Make it the Rabi'a of my heart, sitting permanently in my heart. That's Rabi'a qalbi. Then he said, وَنُورَ صَدْرِ, and make the Quran the light of my chest. The light of my chest. Look how beautiful this is. He said, make the Quran the spring of my heart. So the Quran is supposed to be the water of the heart, meaning it brings life to the dead heart. And if the Quran is in the heart, and now the heart is alive, he said, make my chest full of light. And what does this mean? You know, if I had water and I went to a garden that was dead and I began to irrigate this garden and water it, very soon, flowers would grow, roses would grow of different colors, grass would grow, and it will have a beautiful sight, a good look to it. So the idea is that if a person's heart has been occupied and filled with the Quran and the meanings of the Quran, then it is only a bit of time before the entire chest of a person becomes full of light. And this light begins to extend to his hand and to his words and to his sight and to his hearing and to his feet, and all his entire body would become illuminated. And this is why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would always teach us the importance of focusing on the heart. And he would say there is a flesh that is in the body. If it was upright, the entire body becomes upright. How does the heart become upright? With the Quran. It becomes upright with the meanings of the Quran. And if the heart was fasad, if it was corrupted and tainted and damaged, then the entire body becomes destroyed. How does a person disturb and wreck and destroy his heart? How? By abandoning the Quran, by leaving out the Quran and neglecting it, neglecting its recitation, neglecting its memorization, neglecting listening to it, neglecting seeking treatment through the Quran, neglecting its implementation and pondering over its meaning. This is how a person neglects the Quran. Even if a person has neglected the Quran, how can there be life in his heart? How can there be light in his chest? Then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, وَجَلَاءَ حُزْنِي, and make the Quran the remover of my grief, the remover of my sadness. If a person doesn't have Quran in his life, how is he going to expect that the sadness in his life is going to go? Or the pain of that will subside? How's it going to happen? It will not happen. And the end of the dua, وَذَهَابَ هَمِّي, and make the Quran the abolisher of my worries, which is the future matters. Allow the Quran to remove, because the Quran tells you about the future. It tells you that the matter is in the hands of Allah Azza wa Jal. So the one who is properly reading and implementing and pondering will not be disturbed in his heart. Even this is the importance of the Quran in the life of a believer, and that's the effect of the Quran in removing the pains and the suffering of distress, anxiety, worries and sadness. And as I said to you, this is not just words you say on your tongue. How can a person say, "Oh Allah, make the Quran the happiness and the spring of my heart," and at the same time, the Quran that he has purchased is only sitting on a shelf or only downloaded on his phone with no real connection with it? How is the Quran going to be happiness of his heart? He did not say that the happiness of the heart happens by purchasing a Quran. It happens by engaging with this Quran. And as I said to you, those 5 relationships of the Quran, that a person reads the Quran and he listens to it as well. Listening to the Quran will have the exact same effect as reading the Quran. Even in terms of hasanat, reading 1 letter is 10 hasanat, listening to 1 letter is 10 hasanat as well. And also seeking treatment through the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَشِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla describes this Quran. He says, this advice, this message has come to you from your Lord. And there is great shifa, there is treatment of the heart within it. It treats both the spiritual diseases and physical diseases. It treats them all. So this is the final matter that has been discussed in this prophetic dua that brings comfort to the heart, peace and tranquility to the heart. And of course the other matter with the relationship with the Quran was to ponder over the Quran and then to implement its teachings. And the thing is, when we read the Quran, the majority of us read the Quran with an incorrect approach. The majority of us. And so this is why people give up. I've read the Quran once and twice. Why do I have to read it again? Why do I have to memorize it? It's already on the phone, there's easy access to it. What's the point? And this is because such a person hasn't understood the correct approach of reading the Quran. The greatest reason for why we read the Quran is so that we can source and extract its guidance for us. This is why we read the Quran, for guidance, for guidance. When you read the Quran for guidance, it is a different experience when you read it for any other reason. When you read it just to complete it, when you read it for 10 hasanat per letter, when you read it because it's Ramadan and this is the month of the Quran, this is one thing. But the greatest reason for why we read this Quran, so we can find our guidance within it. Meaning every ayah you read should guide you closer to Allah. If you don't have this effect and this relationship and connection after reading an ayah or two, then stop and read it again. Don't rush. Stop and read it again. Continue to read it until you find guidance within it. And this guidance could be of many matters. If you read an ayah about Allah and it increased your love for Allah, that means you have been guided by this ayah. If you read an ayah and it increased your tawakkul and reliance upon Allah, you have been guided by this ayah. If you read an ayah and it increased it increased your desire for the paradise, and as a result you got up and you did a voluntary deed in hope that Allah Azza wa Jal admits you into His paradise, you have been guided by the ayah. That's why we read the Quran. And if you read it with this attitude, then you will never ever be bored of reading the very same ayat multiple times during the day. Imagine a person read Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and he continued to repeat it and ponder and reflect over the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he remembers Allah's kindness and compassion upon him years ago. And he continues to read Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, remembering every moment of mercy Allah has descended upon him. And then as a result, he is moved. He is moved to make a dua through the name of Allah Ar-Rahman, that He bestow more mercy upon him and admit him into the paradise. You have now been guided by this ayah. You have pondered over the ayah, you have implemented the ayah, and that's the exact reason for why we read the Quran. And the human being needs to be reminded of these guidances in the Quran. You need to be reminded. That's why we have to read them, even if they are things that are obvious in your life. You know, why do the company, Apple, everyone has either an Apple or a Samsung with them. Why does the company, why do they find the need to spend millions and millions of dollars a year across the globe to advertise their product? Who's going to forget their product? It's in your pocket, it's in front of you. Even if you forgot your phone, the first thing you remember is your phone before your children. You run to your phone. The idea is, who's going to forget it? Why are they putting the billboard for? Why are they spending millions of dollars to just put a phone in our face and there's nothing written on the billboard? Just a phone that says new design, that's it. An iPhone whatever with its new number, that's it. Why? Yet I'm telling you, even the most simple of things, people are finding the reason and the need to spend to keep it in your face. Imagine then the messages of the Quran. Don't think that the story of Adam alayhi salam is something we know and move on to something new. Or the story of Hud is something I know, move on to something new. Or Surah Al-Kafirun we know, Surah Al-Fatiha we know, and move on to something new. You're in need of a reminder. You're in need of reading the Quran to remind yourself of the realities that Allah has revealed. Every single day you are in need of this. So that's the idea. This is why we read the Quran, for guidance and to remind ourselves of the guidance of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is not like a book like any other book. Yes, any other book you read once and that's it. A documentary you watch once and that's it. But the Quran, you cannot afford to have the same attitude. If you have the same attitude, this is what happens. The sadness begins to settle on the heart. Worry, pain, the pain of the stress and the anxiety, all this will begin to settle. Why? Because you've chosen to keep away from ayat that would have guided you during these moments. Imagine in a moment of distress and anxiety, and you read the story of the Noon alayhi salam, Yunus alayhi salam, and how he ended up in the belly of a whale, and the whale would close its mouth, and he's in there in triple darkness, the darkness of the belly of the whale, the darkness of the depth of the ocean, the darkness of the night, and the whale is moving with him. Technology today wouldn't even be able to locate him. That's how difficult this calamity was. If he screamed out to anyone, no one could have heard him. Even if they heard him, no one has the tools to save him. Even then, the very first thing he would say, La ilaha illa ant. He's pondering and he's concerned with the dhikr of Allah more than he is concerned with his calamity. You think a person like this is feeling pain and bothered by the calamity that he's in? Clearly not. Because if he was, he would have been speaking about his situation. He would have said, I'm stuck in the belly of a whale. I don't know what to do in here. When am I going to come out? There's no light in here. Where am I? What's happening to me? What's the next step? He didn't think of this. The first thing he rushed to say was Allah, the name of Allah. Meaning his concern with Allah is greater than his concern in his calamity. And then as a result, this is how, and this is what we've been speaking about, this is how the pain and the suffering of the calamity would subside. It won't become anything. Khalas. Rather, Yunus alayhi salam takes it to a further step. And this is why I'm saying, you read these stories in the Quran, they remind you of this reality. You need the guidance of the ayat. You can't afford to say, I know the story is good, we'll move on to something else. You need this. Every here and there, once you read the Quran and you come to it again, it refreshes your understanding, refreshes your commitment, refreshes your knowledge. There is barakah in this. Kitabun anzallahu ilayka mubarakun. Barakah in this. There is mercy in this. There's shifa in this. You need the shifa every day. You can't say, Ana wallah, I have medicine and I put it on the side. How's it going to benefit you? The Quran is like this. The Quran is medicine. You put it on the side and you say, I've read it. Allah, when Ramadan comes, I'll read. You can't afford to do that with medicine. For worldly life medicine, you don't do that with. The Quran is medicine. We're all sick. We all need this medicine. We have sicknesses and diseases in the heart, in our actions, in our word, in our behavior, in our attitude, in our dealings with others, in our relationship with people. We all have shortcomings. We all have flaws. How is this ever going to be rectified and corrected? How would you be cured from that if the Quran is not being taken as a daily dose in your life? That's why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in this prophetic supplication, he began with a grand start and a grand opening, acknowledging to Allah Azza wa Jal, I am your slave, the son of your slave, son of your female slave. And then he goes on to say, all my affairs are in your hand. Oh Allah, I ask you with every name that belongs to you in your books and that you revealed and gave the prophets and all of these matters. And then at the end, what are you asking for? Please, oh Allah, make this Quran embedded within my heart and the spring of my heart. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla at the end of this matter, at the end of this lecture, that He accept from us and forgive our sins and our shortcomings and make the Quran the guidance of our heart and the remover and the abolisher of our worries and miseries. إنه ولي ذلك والقادر عليه. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.